The protests that quickly turned into riots that began in Portland after the death of George Floyd in the end of May have receded just a little bit since the election, as if it was a temper tantrum about Trump at some level, but not completely at all, which then suggests, well, what is it? What are you people doing? So acts of vandalism continued in Portland, even though the weather now here is quite chilly, quite wet, quite not conducive to hanging out in a street party. Here's a story from the Oregonian from a couple of days ago. Or actually just 2 days ago. Police arrest 3 after protest-related vandalism in Southeast Portland. They, of course, went after the local chain of excellent, I think, supermarkets, New Seasons, and say that they were protesting, quote, colonialism, gentrification, and capitalism. This was Wednesday night in specific prelude to Thanksgiving, because that is what they see the holiday as. Thank you, Zach. They're never going to run out of excuses, of course, right? So those words I should have, and I did not predict that they would have been the words used in this case: colonization, capitalism, and gentrification that Thanksgiving represents, according to some protester that talked to the author of that Oregonian article. But the fact that they aren't going to run out of reasons that can fit absolutely any scenario does not answer the question of why the adults in charge continue to let it happen. What could possibly be going on here? And this, I don't want to be talking about this again, but you be weak in the face of a tantrum and then be assured that the tantrums are going to get worse in the future. Of course they will. If you've ever dealt with a small child, or especially if you've seen some other parent failing to deal with the tantrums of their children, it's easier if it's not your own, and see them get worse and worse and worse, the kid get less and less and less both controllable and productive and happy in the face of a parent who is weak-willed and makes fake threats, etc. And there's no good resolution down that road. This is about power. It's about power. We should be listening to them when they say that everything is about power, and take it back from them. They have demonstrated that they're neither mature nor wise enough to have power. Why are we giving it to them?
All right. So we are giving it to them, I believe, because we keep running into the same structure in stories that are so different from each other that we don't recognize it as the same, right? We have a conflict between the individual level and the higher level of analysis. In other words, governance is the manifestation of our collective interests, or at least it's supposed to be, but it's staffed by individuals who have interests that make them manipulable and can cause you to get them to do things that are actually bad for all of us, right? Mm-hmm. So the politician may understand, in fact, that the right thing to do is to deal with the protest, but they may not want to pay the price of the person who makes that call, right? We have
okay, but the election just happened.
Oh, I agree.
They've got a little time here, and yeah, go on.
Well, I guess my point would be, I would agree that if you were going to see a shift in which the collective well-being took precedence over the individual survival of the politician, you would expect it to be right after the election, when they have the longest period of time for memory to fade before the next election. So the fact that we're not seeing it now ought to scare the hell out of us, because it means even under the best of circumstances, these people can't find their balls and, make the right call.
It's also true that I am certain, I do not have the data to back this up, but I am certain that a majority of Portlanders do not want this garbage to continue. This is not what most people want. Lots of people quietly will say, I can't believe this is continuing to happen. In fact, I, interacting without people knowing what my positions are, not being familiar with the podcast, etc., have had no one say, good on them, keep it up. And everyone who has brought it up say, this needs to stop. I don't know where our leadership is.
Well, I agree. Now, I do think there's a sampling bias.
There sure is.
You
And
know,
like I said, these are people who don't know who I am, I think, but obviously there is, there are circles in which I travel.
right. And, just by virtue of what one does in the world at the moment, the people you're most likely to interact with are people who, have businesses and, things like
Yeah,
that.
although,
So,
retail clerks, I try to engage the people, not just who are, who own the small businesses that are still managing to stay afloat, that we can manage to go to at this point, but anyone who's ringing up a purchase who presumably is, not a small business owner for the most part.
right. But even, I hate to say this, but even those people, have jobs, they're working towards something. And so they're not hell bent on destruction. So, it's a
But
non.
but that's the thing. Do you think a majority of Portlanders don't have jobs and are hell bent on destruction? No, you don't.
No, I don't.
Right?
But here's what I do think is that the game theory that causes a mayor to do things that any rational analysis would say are insane from the point of view of what a mayor is supposed to accomplish, those same phenomena structure the interactions of the public, because the public of Portland is involved in signaling its agreement that there is something dire about our, racial dynamics, that this is having important
Yep.
impacts on people's well-being. And, to that extent, I agree. But the point is that active signaling, and in fact, the positive feedback as people are one-upping each other and signaling just how irate they are about these dynamics and just how interested they are in a solution, is causing those at the higher level, at the level of actual governance, to be paralyzed because they think they are facing an angry population that is demanding these things. And, that is, of course, fueled by the fact that those people who are breaking the law are actively punishing anybody who tries to say, hey, look, this is unreasonable, right? Those people, if you say this is unreasonable, you're a fascist, you're a Nazi, you're all of these things. So what that means is there's from the point of view of the power structure, there is an artificial deficit of disagreement over what is to happen next, and a false consensus about do more, do it now, and here's the stuff, defund, abolish, all of these things.
Although I think it was the first action of the city council after the recent election, which had an important vote that went a different way because Mingus Mapps won this seat from incumbent Chloe Udley, voted against city council member Hardesty's desire to defund by $18 million the Portland Police Bureau. So that it seemed like that was going to go through, which would have been, I wish I knew what fraction of the police budget that was, and I don't remember. It seemed like that was going to go through, and that would have been a devastating blow to police and policing in Portland, but it did not go through. So, again, there are these sort of little things. The election happened. We got an apparent rejection of the chaos on the streets of Portland, and yet still, as of 2-3 nights ago, there is still Black Bloc marauding on the streets, doing vandalism, and why? Like, why? Who wants to live in a society like that?
Yeah, it's nobody. It's not a society. And one hopeful note. I did talk to somebody this week who I'm going to interview on the podcast, who has been close in with these circles, and it sounds like we've argued that there are two forces that came together this summer, that you had a Black Lives Matter force motivated by George Floyd's death, and you had a long-standing why did I just lose the word anarchist thread here in the Pacific Northwest, and that these things became one.
Well, and you had COVID exhaustion.
Well, you had lots of contributing factors,
Sure.
but you had two factions that marched together and were involved in some kind of dynamic that was big, and they seem to be going their separate ways. And to the extent that what is going on in Portland and in some other major cities is actually about anarchism, maybe the public is going to start to wake up, that just because they say Black Lives Matter before they bust in your storefront doesn't make this a coherent action. That and these people, if you talk to them, they really do have this nonsense idea that the route to the better world is just to tear it all down, and that we will be better off without it. And they're nuts. And frankly, I think it's a lot easier to recognize the insanity of their position than it is to understand what's wrong with Black Lives Matter. Because, of course, the Black Lives Matter slogan is right.
Right.
And so it covers a lot.